The HOA president called it a clerical mix-up, right before her backhoe rolled into my driveway. That morning, I found a bright orange notice nailed to my boathouse. Demolition ordered by an HOA I wasn't even part of. They thought I'd back down. But when the backhoe showed up, I called my daughter, the FBI agent. And a few weeks later, that quiet lake watched an entire HOA empire fall. The morning mist always came first. It rolled across the lake in slow, heavy ribbons, silver under the early light, thick enough to muffle the sound of the loons out near the inlet. I'd been waking to that view for 30 years, ever since Sarah and I built the little cedar cabin on the eastern shore. These days, I kept to a quiet routine, grind the coffee beans by hand, stoke the wood stove and step out onto the dock with my mug while the world still belonged to the fog. That morning, the air smelled of pine and wet stone. I remember thinking it was the kind of calm that made the heart slow down, until I saw something bright and wrong at the end of the dock. It was a sheet of orange paper, fluttering against the gray like a wound in the mist. I walked closer, the boards creaking under my slippers. The notice was nailed, actually nailed, to the boathouse door, right through the cedar plank I'd stained myself last summer. The head of the nail was thick and new, silver against the old wood. I stopped and stared at it a long moment before pulling it free. The paper was official-looking, full of bold letters and boxes. The heading read, Lakeshore Ridge Homeowners Association. Final notice. Demolition scheduled. My eyes followed the words, each one heavier than the last. It listed unpaid dues totaling 11,142.36, a line item for unapproved dock repairs, another for non-compliant exterior materials. I frowned. My land wasn't part of Lakeshore Ridge or any other HOA. The nearest subdivision was half a mile away, on the far side of the old county road. A thin breeze tugged the paper from my hand, sent it skittering across the dock. I caught it before it hit the water, folded it carefully, and slipped it into my jacket pocket. Inside the cabin, I laid it flat on the kitchen table beside the deed my grandfather had signed in 1962. The edges of the deed were soft and yellowed from years of handling. There was no question. The plat number matched the one on my last tax bill. My property stopped well before the Lakeshore Ridge boundary. Whatever this was, it wasn't legal. I poured another cup of coffee and stared at the paper. The more I looked, the less sense it made. Who nails a notice to a stranger's boathouse? Who invents dues for land they don't own? My mind ran through possibilities. Mistaken address, bad survey, some clerk ticking the wrong box. But deep down, I felt something colder. The precision of the numbers, the confident tone. It didn't read like a mistake. It read like entitlement. Out the window, the mist began to thin. The surface of the lake caught the light, and the mountains beyond it came back into view. That's when I heard it. A low hum, steady and mechanical, echoing off the water. At first I thought it was a logging truck on the highway, but the sound grew louder, closer, until it pressed against the cabin walls. I stepped onto the porch. The gravel road that curved down toward my property was still hidden by trees, but I could see the faint tremor of dust rising through the sunlight. Then came the crunch of tires on rock. Slow, deliberate, heavy. Not a pickup, not any neighbor I knew. I set my mug down on the railing, the warmth fading from my hands. The lake, the dock, the mist, all of it suddenly felt smaller, boxed in. Something about that sound, the growl of diesel in the quiet morning, told me this wasn't just a notice. It was a warning, and it was heading straight for me. The crunch of gravel drew closer, louder, until the whole porch seemed to hum beneath my feet. When the first shape broke through the line of pines, I recognized the square yellow frame of a backhoe loaded on a flatbed. Behind it, a white pickup crawled along, hazard lights flashing in the mist. Both vehicles came to a stop near the split-rail fence at the end of my drive. Two men climbed down, hard hats, reflective vests, clipboards. One of them glanced up at the cabin but didn't wave. He tapped the side of his clipboard and pointed toward the dock. I couldn't hear the words, but I didn't need to. I pulled my jacket tight and stepped off the porch. The air smelled of diesel and cold water. "Can I help you?" I called out. The bigger man turned. His name tag read HOA Demolition. He squinted at me like he was trying to place my face from some paperwork. "You Jake Remy?" "I am." He nodded, almost relieved. "We got a work order here," he said, holding up the clipboard. "Says we're to remove the boathouse. Non-compliant structure, per Lakeshore Ridge, HOA. You'll need to clear the area." I stared at the form clipped to his board. My name, my parcel number. The same HOA seal as the orange notice. Only now, the paper carried a signature. Bethany Whitfield, President. "There's been a mistake," I said evenly. "I'm not part of any HOA." He shrugged, shifting his weight. "Not my call, sir. You can take it up with the office. We just do the removal." I watched the backhoe driver crank the ignition. The engine coughed once, then settled into a low, threatening purr. The sound vibrated in my chest. "Turn that off," I said. "Now!" The foreman held up his hand. "Look, Mr. Remy, we're on a schedule. You pay the outstanding dues, 12,000 even, or we start tearing it down. I can give you 10 minutes. He wasn't cruel, just numb. One more man carrying out a task he didn't care to understand. I took a long breath, forcing calm into my voice. "You'll get nothing from me but a phone call," I said, and turned toward the cabin. Inside, I sat at the table, unfolded the orange notice, and dialed the number printed at the bottom. The line rang twice before a woman's voice answered, smooth and sweet, like a talk show host from the old AM stations. "Lakeshore Ridge Homeowners Association. This is Bethany." "This is Jake Remy," I said. "I just found a demolition notice on my property. There's a crew outside my home with heavy equipment. I don't belong to your HOA." A pause, just long enough to sound calculated. "Oh, Mr. Remy, yes, I see your file here." Papers shuffled faintly on her end. "It appears you're several quarters behind on your dues, but not to worry. Once payment is processed, we'll cancel the removal order." "There are no dues," I said. "My property line ends before your subdivision begins. I have the deed to prove it." Another pause. Then came the gentle tone people use with small children or lost pets. "Well, sir, it seems your parcel was annexed last month after a community vote. I'm sure you received the notice by mail." "I received nothing but a nail in my door," I said. "You can't annex private land by committee." She gave a practiced laugh, light as sugar. "Oh, Mr. Remy, these things happen all the time. Paperwork gets delayed, clerks misfile surveys. Don't worry. I'll personally flag this as a clerical mix-up. I'll have it fixed before the crew gets too far ahead." Her words were meant to soothe, but something in them scratched at me, an off note beneath the sweetness. I heard her smile through the phone when she said clerical mix-up, the same way a card shark smiles before flipping a queen. I leaned over the table, my knuckles whitening. "You'll fix it?" "Of course," she said. "Just leave everything to me." The call ended with a click that sounded too final. Outside, the backhoe idled for another minute before the engine cut off. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was loaded, like the hush before a storm. Through the window, I watched the men secure their rig, exchange a few words, and drive off down the road, the flatbed's taillights fading into the trees. The quiet settled heavy over the lake again, but it wasn't the same quiet as before. It carried the echo of that voice, the syruped politeness, the casual authority of someone who thought they owned more than they did. I poured the last of my coffee down the sink and stared at my reflection in the window. Behind me, the orange paper lay on the counter beside the deed and tax bill, a triangle of truth, proof, and threat. Somewhere in town, that woman was telling herself she'd handled me, but she hadn't. Not yet. The next morning, the mist didn't come. The air was clear and bright, and when the first sound reached my porch, it wasn't birds or wind. It was the rumble of an engine I already knew. I set my mug down and stepped outside. The sun had barely cleared the ridge, throwing long gold bars of light across the lake. But the sound wasn't soft. It was the low, grinding growl of diesel gears climbing my gravel road. When the yellow backhoe appeared again, crawling past the pine line like a beast with its head down, I knew Bethany Whitfield hadn't fixed a damn thing. The flatbed stopped near the turnoff, same as before, dust spilling like smoke from its tires. A second vehicle, a silver pickup with a flashing amber light, pulled in behind it. The two men from yesterday jumped down, only this time they didn't look hesitant. They were here to work. I met them halfway down the drive. "I told you yesterday," the foreman, Kruger, cut me off. "We got the go-ahead from the HOA office last night, Mr. Remy. Says you didn't make payment or show proof of exemption." He slapped a sheaf of papers with his thick hand. "This is our final visit before we start the teardown." Behind him, the backhoe's driver revved the engine once, a heavy metallic roar that made the windows of my cabin hum. I could feel my pulse in my neck. "You're trespassing," I said quietly. "And if you touch that dock, you'll be liable for every splinter." Kruger sighed, the way men do when they think they're dealing with someone stubborn. "Look, sir, you can settle this right now. 12 grand, certified check, and we're gone. Otherwise, my crew starts with the boathouse, then the main cabin." Something in me snapped, not with rage, but with clarity. Arguing wouldn't work. These weren't villains, they were pawns holding a hammer someone else had swung. I gave him a long look. "You said 12,000? He nodded, uneasy. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and took 3 photos in slow sequence. His face, the truck's logo, the backhoe's plate number. The click of the shutter was louder than the engine. "Thanks. That's all I needed." He frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I'm not paying a penny to fix someone else's fraud." I turned, walked up the steps, and locked the door behind me. The sound of the bolt sliding home felt solid, final. Inside, I sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by silence that wasn't peace anymore. My fingers trembled slightly as I picked up the phone and dialed the only number that made sense. Sarah answered on the first ring. "Dad?" Her voice was steady, crisp the way it got when she was working a case. "They're here again," I said. "Same crew. They claim they've got permission. I called that woman, Bethany Whitfield, and she told me she'd take care of it. She lied." "Listen carefully," Sarah said. I could hear the click of a keyboard in the background. "Do not talk to them again. Don't threaten, don't engage. Just document. Photos, time, date, license plates, everything. Then go inside and lock your door." "I already did." "Good. Now find your property file, the deed, the survey, and your last tax bill. Scan or photograph every page and send it to me." "What are you going to do?" There was a short pause, the sound of controlled breathing. "Cross-reference the plat maps. If they filed something new with the county, I'll find it." Outside, the foreman and his crew milled around, muttering. One of them gestured toward the dock. The backhoe's engine coughed back to life, idling low and mean. Sarah's tone sharpened. "Dad, I mean it. Don't go out there. Let them make the next mistake." I hung up and moved through the cabin with purpose now, camera in one hand, paperwork in the other. I documented everything. The orange notice from yesterday, the work order in Kruger's fist, the men smoking by the truck, the diesel smoke curling like storm clouds over my lake. Every click of the shutter steadied me. It felt less like fear, more like building a case, one photo at a time. An hour later, the crew finally packed up. Kruger didn't knock or wave. He just left a new notice taped to my porch railing. I waited until their taillights disappeared, then peeled it off. Notice of escalated fines. Total due, $23,480.52. The number doubled overnight, like punishment for defiance. That evening, I ate dinner standing at the counter, too restless to sit. Outside, the lake reflected the orange edge of sunset, the water calm and deceitful. Then I noticed something strange through the window, a flicker in the tree line. I grabbed my binoculars and leaned toward the glass. Between the trunks, half hidden in shadow, stood a man with a camera. A long lens glinted in the dying light. He wasn't taking pictures of the scenery. He was aimed straight at my house. I stepped onto the porch, heart thudding, and raised my voice. "Hey!" The man froze, then disappeared into the trees without a word. The quiet returned, heavier than ever. I went back inside, locked the door, and sat at my desk. It was time to stop reacting. It was time to start investigating. When I opened my laptop, an email from Sarah was waiting. Subject: You need to see this. Inside was a scanned image, a county filing dated 6 weeks ago. Under annexation boundary adjustment, someone had redrawn the map, extending the HOA's line 200 feet north. Right over my property. Filed by Bethany Whitfield. Approved by Lakeshore Ridge HOA Board. I stared at the signature, my pulse steady now, cold as the lake at midnight. This wasn't bureaucracy. It was theft, on paper, clean and calculated, and I wasn't the kind of man to let that stand. The glow from my laptop threw long shadows across the cabin walls. Outside, the lake was black glass, still and soundless, like it was holding its breath. I sat there, the hum of the refrigerator the only noise in the house, staring at Bethany Whitfield's name over and over. Her signature was neat, almost elegant, the kind of handwriting that came from a woman who believed herself above consequence. I printed the document, slid it into a folder, and set it beside the deed. Then I reached for the landline, the one I'd kept since before cell service made its way up here. I dialed Sarah's number again. She answered before the first ring finished. "You saw it," she said. Not a question. "I saw it," I replied, "and I want it reversed." "Dad, that filing isn't just an error, it's a forged annexation. The HOA has no jurisdiction outside their recorded boundary, but they filed it with the county recorder, which means it looks official until it's challenged. Then we challenge it." She was quiet for a moment. I could almost hear her thinking, the way she did when she was piecing together a case. "First, you need certified evidence," she said finally. "Get the official plat map from the clerk's office, the real one, and I'll trace the submission trail, who signed, who notarized, and where the document was uploaded from. That'll tell us if this was a one-off or something bigger." "Bigger?" "Dad," she said, "people don't forge boundaries unless they've done it before." The line went silent, and I heard the faint clicking of her keyboard. "I'll call you when I have something." The next morning, I drove into town. The road hugged the ridge line, weaving between pines that still held beads of dew. My old Ford rattled around the curves like it had a memory of every trip Sarah and I had ever taken together when she was a kid. Back then, she'd stick her hand out the window, chasing the wind. Now she was chasing paper trails through government databases. The county building stood on Main Street, a brick relic with iron doors and floors that smelled of lemon cleaner and dust. At the records counter sat a young woman wearing glasses too big for her face. "Parcel 75B1, Pa," I told her, sliding my ID across the counter. "I need the current certified plat map." She typed for a while, the clack of her keyboard echoing in the empty lobby. "Found it," she said, swiveling her monitor toward me. On the screen was a clean black and white map, the lake, the surrounding lots, and a bold dark line marking the lakeshore ridge boundary. My parcel sat well outside it, just as I remembered. "I'll need a certified copy," I said. She printed it, signed, and stamped it with the county seal, an inked emblem of the courthouse, faintly smudged from years of use. The sound of the metal stamp striking paper felt like justice in miniature. As I left the building, sunlight caught on the silver foil of the seal. I slipped the document into the folder beside my deed and drove home with the windows cracked, the wind carrying the scent of pine and exhaust. Halfway up the ridge road, my phone buzzed. Sarah's name lit the screen. "Dad, I've been digging," she said as soon as I answered. Bethany filed similar annexations in 2 other counties. Both times, adjacent lakefront parcels suddenly became part of her HOA. In one case, the owner sold within a month. The other fought it in court, but the records vanished mid-case. Vanished. Digitally wiped. No chain of custody. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. "So she's done this before." "She's practiced," Sarah said, "and you're her next mark. But she picked the wrong family this time." When I reached home, the lake looked deceptively calm. The light had changed, harder, sharper, as if the world knew what was coming. I parked and walked toward the dock. From the hill, I could already tell something was off. The dumpster was gone. So was the backhoe. For one hopeful heartbeat, I thought it was over, that the call, the paperwork, the threat had scared them off. Then I saw the splinters. Where the boathouse had stood for 30 years, only a scar remained, a flat patch of torn earth and jagged boards. The air smelled of wet sawdust and fuel. My knees nearly buckled, but I forced myself forward. Pieces of cedar I'd cut with my own hands lay shattered across the rocks. The water lapped against the remains of the dock, carrying away slivers of wood like drifted bones. At the center of the wreckage, a single thing survived. The metal sign Sarah and I had hung years ago, Remy Boathouse, Esther 1993. It was dented, half buried in sand, but the name was still visible. I sank to one knee, fingers pressing into the damp soil. The anger didn't come as a rush. It came as a weight, settling deep and cold. Behind me, tires crunched on gravel. I turned to see Sheriff McKay's patrol SUV pulling up the drive. The man stepped out slowly, his Stetson casting a shadow over eyes that had seen too much. "Morning, Jake," he said quietly. "Heard some noise out this way last night." "You could say that." I gestured toward the wreckage. "Got a court order or a warrant for this?" He shook his head. "None that I could find." He stepped closer, crouched, and touched one of the splintered boards. "You know who sent the crew?" "Lakeshore Ridge HOA," I said. "Bethany Whitfield signed the order." He exhaled through his nose, long and slow. "You planning to rebuild?" "Not yet," I said. "First, I'm going to rebuild the truth." The sheriff studied me for a long moment, then nodded once. "Keep your notes, Jake. Don't touch a thing till we get the report filed. You'll want every nail documented." As he left, I looked back at the lake. The reflection of the sky rippled over the wreckage, turning every splinter of Cedar into a sliver of light. Bethany thought she'd erased a structure. She didn't realize she'd built me a case. The sound of the sheriff's SUV faded down the gravel road until it was swallowed by the trees. What was left behind was a silence so thick it almost hummed. The air smelled of diesel and sap, and every now and then the wind moved through the pile of wreckage, making the broken boards sigh against each other. I walked slowly along what used to be the dock, my boots crunching on shattered planks. The water lapped softly at the edges of the debris, pulling loose nails and splinters into its depths. In the middle of it all, half buried under a tangle of beams, something caught the sunlight. I bent down and pulled it free. A faded photograph. The edges curled and soft from years of humidity. It was Sarah and me, 30 years younger, standing in front of the half-finished boathouse. She was still a teenager then, freckles on her nose, her hair tied back under a baseball cap. In the picture, she was holding a hammer, grinning wide. I was behind her, one hand on her shoulder, sawdust in my beard. For a moment, the memory broke through the anger. The way she'd insisted on learning how to drive nails straight, how Sarah had said this boathouse would outlast both of us. I slipped the photograph into my pocket and stood there until the ache in my chest steadied into something colder. By noon, the sun burned high and white above the ridge. The lake no longer shimmered, it glared. I went inside, poured myself a glass of water, and sat at the kitchen table with the file I'd started. Evidence, not emotion. Each page was a piece of the story. The orange notice, the demolition order, the photographs of the trucks, the certified plat map, and now, pictures of the ruin outside. I added one more sheet, timeline of events, and began writing in clean, measured strokes. 06:45 a.m. Diesel engine heard from North Road. 07:00 a.m. Backhoe enters property. 09:30 a.m. Structure removed without warrant or consent. 10:15 a.m. Sheriff McKay notified and present. As the ink dried, the words on the page felt less like notes and more like nails driven into truth. That evening, I heard another engine, smaller, steadier, familiar. I stepped out to see headlights cresting the ridge. A black sedan rolled down the drive, dust curling behind it. When the door opened, Sarah stepped out, still in her dark bureau jacket, hair tied back in that tight braid she wore when she was working. She didn't say anything at first, just looked past me at the wreckage. Her jaw tightened. "They really did it," she said quietly. "They did." She walked closer, crouched by the pile of splintered cedar, touched one of the beams, then stood again, hands on her hips. "You've got photos?" "All of them, time-stamped. Sheriff's report pending." She nodded once. "Good. We'll need every frame." We went inside. The kitchen table, once a place for morning coffee, now looked like an evidence board. Documents stacked in labeled piles, envelopes with printed photos, the map under a glass paperweight. Sarah moved through it like a detective walking a crime scene. "You know," she said, "Whitfield didn't file that forged map by accident. It's part of a bigger pattern. She's been redrawing property lines in multiple counties. She waits until someone's paperwork is quiet. Retirees, widowers, people who don't check their mail every week. And then she annexes them on paper. Half the time the victims just pay to make it stop. And the other half? They sell," Sarah said. "Cheap." I leaned back, the chair creaking. "She's stealing land one plat line at a time." Sarah met my eyes. "Not anymore." The next morning, before dawn, I woke to the sound of a car door shutting outside. I went to the window and saw a different kind of vehicle. Sleek, dark, official. Then another pulled in behind it, headlights sweeping across the cabin. I stepped out onto the porch as two men got out, both wearing the same calm, deliberate expressions I'd seen on Sarah's fade 1,000 times. The taller one gave me a nod. "Mr. Remy?" I nodded back. "Marcus Reed," he said, shaking my hand. "U.S. Postal Inspector, Sarah's brother." He gestured toward the second man stepping out of the car. "And that's Travis Ray, attorney, specializes in water rights and land use." They followed me inside, the smell of dust and pine giving way to coffee and paper. My old kitchen table became a war room. Marcus unpacked a laptop and a small recorder. Travis laid out a stack of legal pads and a folded map of the county. Sarah was already in motion. "Dad, we're turning your home into a temporary field office," she said. "Don't argue." I wasn't going to, I said. It's about time the law worked for me instead of around me. For the next few hours, the cabin buzzed with quiet purpose. The clatter of keys, the rustle of papers, the soft hum of the printer. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the scent of rain from across the lake. Marcus tapped his keyboard. Got it, he said finally. Payment records from Lakeshore Ridge HOA. $500,000 in 5 years labeled general contracting. But there's no listed vendor, no invoices, no breakdowns. Travis leaned over his shoulder. Follow the money. Already am, Marcus said, and a moment later he turned the screen toward us. Here, the payee, Whitfield Contracting, sole proprietor, David Whitfield, her brother. Sarah exhaled, slow and satisfied. We've got motive and fraud. She's been funneling HOA funds into her own family's account. That's federal. I stood by the window, looking out at the ruined dock glowing pale under the morning light. The surface of the lake rippled in slow circles. It looked like peace, but I knew better now. Peace, like property lines, only existed if you protected it. Behind me, Sarah's voice cut through the silence. Dad, we're going to end this, but we'll do it by the book. I turned back to her, the photo of us building the boathouse still in my pocket. Good, I said, because I've still got plenty of pages left. The next morning began like no other I'd lived through in that house. The cabin smelled of fresh coffee and printer ink instead of pine and dust. My kitchen table, once the place where Sarah had spread out her schoolwork and I'd read the paper, was now covered with laptops, file folders, and cables snaking toward every outlet. Sarah had taken command like she'd been born for it. Marcus sat across from her, typing furiously, glasses sliding down his nose. His screen glowed with spreadsheets and banking records. Travis paced the floor, flipping through the county property statutes. The air buzzed with quiet urgency, the way power does when it's contained and focused. I stood by the window, looking out at what was left of the boathouse. The lake glimmered dull silver under a sky thick with low clouds. Every time the wind shifted, it carried the scent of raw cedar and rain. Behind me, Marcus muttered, "Got something." Sarah leaned over. "Talk to me." He tapped a few keys and turned the laptop around. Here's the ledger from Lakeshore Ridge HOA, 5 years of expenditures. Half of the payments are labeled community contracting. The checks all go to the same company, Whitfield Contracting, owned by David Whitfield, Bethany's brother. Travis looked up from his notes. Classic self-dealing, illegal under both state HOA code and federal wire fraud statutes if dues crossed county lines. Sarah's mouth tightened. They did. She bills residents electronically. That's interstate transmission. They exchanged a look I'd seen before. Two professionals spotting a weak point in a structure, about to push. I crossed my arms. You think you've got enough? Sarah shook her head. Not yet. We need a confession, or at least proof of intent. Fraud's one thing, intent makes it criminal. Marcus sat back, smiling thinly. Then we'll make her say it herself. That afternoon, we set the trap. Marcus pulled up the HOA's website, scrolling until he found the phone number listed for their finance office. He pressed the speakerphone button and dialed. The ring cut through the cabin's quiet like a metronome. A gravelly voice answered, half asleep, half annoyed. Lakeshore Ridge, Greg Purcell speaking. Mr. Purcell, Marcus said, his tone friendly, soft as molasses. I'm calling on behalf of my father, Jake Remy. There seems to be a bit of confusion about a dumpster that was dropped on his driveway last week. Oh, that? The man chuckled, the sound wet and smug. Yeah, that's not a mistake. He can get it removed when he pays his fines. I see, Marcus said smoothly. And if he doesn't? Then he learns to live with it, Purcell replied. That's how it works. He's on our property now, whether he likes it or not. Travis jotted notes furiously. Marcus pressed, his tone still light. We're just worried about him. He's an old man. Might be easier for everyone if he sold the place, right? The pause on the other end was just long enough to catch. Then Greg laughed again. That's the idea, kid. We make it uncomfortable. He'll fold. They always do. Marcus ended the call. The silence that followed was electric. Sarah broke it first. That's extortion. On record. Travis nodded. And paired with the forged plat map, it's enough to file a criminal complaint. I exhaled slowly. Then we do it. I want every line in black and white. By evening, Travis had drafted a cease and desist letter so sharp it could cut glass. It detailed the fraudulent annexation, the illegal blockade, the financial self-dealing, and the recorded admission of harassment. Each violation was cited with precision, every statute, every precedent. Sarah read it aloud once, her voice steady and deliberate. When she finished, the only sound in the cabin was the wind moving through the eaves. We deliver it tonight, she said. But we didn't have to. Just after sunset, headlights flashed across the front yard. A car stopped at the gate. I opened the door, expecting Sheriff McKay, but instead, a courier stepped out, wearing a polo with the HOA logo stitched on the chest. He carried a white envelope. Delivery for Mr. Remy, he said, almost cheerful. I took it, signed the clipboard, and watched him drive away. Inside, under the lamp, I opened the envelope. Another bill. Second notice. Fines doubled. Non-compliant structure. Exterior violation. Total due. $24,480. Travis let out a short, humorless laugh. They're digging their own grave. Sarah folded her arms. They think they're untouchable. Tomorrow, they learn they're not. That night, the storm rolled in from the west. The first drops hit the tin roof in slow, deliberate taps, then built into a steady drumming. Lightning flashed once across the water, lighting up the ruined dock like the skeleton of some old ship. I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window, the photo of Sarah and me in my hand. The sound of the rain was relentless, but it couldn't wash away what they'd done. When I finally turned out the light, I thought of Bethany Whitfield somewhere across that lake, sleeping soundly, thinking the storm was hers to command. She had no idea it was already turning against her. The next morning broke clear. The sky scrubbed clean by the rain. The lake gleamed like glass, not a ripple disturbing its surface. I sat on the porch with my coffee and stared at the ruins, steam rising from the damp cedar. Everything smelled of earth and smoke and something faintly electric, the scent of change waiting in the air. Sarah joined me a few minutes later, still in her bureau jacket. She looked as sharp as the morning light. You ready to get proactive? She asked. I nodded. Let's build her a trap she won't see coming. Marcus and Travis stepped out behind her, both holding clipboards and cameras. The three of them had been up half the night, sketching diagrams and running ideas. By breakfast, the plan was set. We weren't going to chase Bethany through courts and filings this time. We were going to make her come to us, on my land, under my rules. By noon, the storm had dried the gravel road enough to work. I loaded the bed of my truck with a few fresh boards and a bundle of 2x4s from the shed. From a distance, it looked like I was rebuilding the boathouse. Up close, anyone who paid attention would see it was a decoy, just enough lumber to bait a trespasser who couldn't resist control. We carried the boards down to the dock. Each one groaned under its own weight, still damp from rain. The sound of nails clinking in the tin pail echoed across the lake. I stacked them neatly where the old structure had stood and laid out a set of fake blueprints on the sawhorse beside them. The top sheet read, Proposed Expansion Plan, Reinforced Dock, Pending County Approval. I made sure the words pending county approval were underlined twice, dark enough to be read through a window 50 yards away. Sarah gave an approving nod. "That'll do it." While I busied myself arranging the boards, Marcus unpacked 4 small cameras, each no bigger than a golf ball. "These things record in 4K and upload to a private server," he said. "They'll trigger automatically if anything moves within 30 feet. He handed one to Travis, who tucked it into the hollow of a birdhouse hanging near the tree line. Another went under the cabin eave, one inside a hedge by the driveway, and the last behind the window of my workshop, facing the dock. "Once she steps on this property, we'll have her in full view," Marcus said, brushing dirt from his hands. "Angle, timestamp, facial ID, all admissible." Sarah leaned against the porch railing. "Now we wait." It's funny how quiet waiting can feel when you know something big is coming. The next day crawled by slow as sap. The air turned warm again, the kind of still heat that makes insects buzz louder than reason. Each time the motion alert pinged on Marcus's phone, we froze. Once it was a squirrel scampering across the dock. Another time a heron swooped low over the water, its wings flashing white against the blue. By the second evening, even I started to doubt she'd take the bait. Then, just before noon on the third day, Marcus's phone vibrated on the table. One soft ping, then another. He looked down, his expression sharpening. "We've got movement." Sarah leaned over his shoulder as he tapped the feed open. The image on the screen made my stomach tighten. There she was, Bethany Whitfield, walking down my gravel drive like she owned it. She wore a cream-colored blazer, too bright for the mud, and carried a clipboard in one hand, her phone in the other. Even from the camera's low angle, I could see the practiced set of her smile, the kind people wear when they're about to lecture you on the rules. "She's bold," Travis muttered. "She's predictable," Sarah said. We watched as Bethany stopped by the edge of the dock, flipping through her papers as if inspecting an active construction site. She crouched down, ran a finger over the stacked boards, and then lifted her phone, snapping photo after photo. "She's documenting an imaginary violation," Marcus whispered. "She's creating her own evidence." "Keep recording," Sarah said. Bethany straightened, brushing her hands on her skirt, then turned toward the cabin. The camera under the eave caught her face in full, calm, calculating, self-assured. She crossed the yard, heels clicking against the gravel, and stepped up to the workshop window. There, through the glass, lay the blueprints we'd planted. She pressed her palm to the glass, leaning close to read the words. The camera caught every second. "Got her trespassing," Marcus said softly. "We've got her cold." But Bethany didn't stop. She pulled her phone again, took pictures through the window, zoomed in on the fake plans and, just for a moment, smiled. It wasn't joy. It was satisfaction. The look of someone who believed they were untouchable. Then came the sound that would end it all. From up the road, faint at first, came the low rumble of engines, 2 of them, steady and synchronized. Dust rose between the trees like morning fog. Bethany turned, her face twitching with surprise as the first black SUV rolled into view. Another followed close behind, both unmarked but unmistakable. Sarah's phone buzzed. She looked at me and nodded. "It's time." We stepped out onto the porch together, but stayed silent, watching through the thinning haze as the SUVs glided down the drive. Bethany froze halfway to her car. Her shoulders stiffened. The vehicles came to a stop, blocking the exit in perfect symmetry. Doors opened in unison, and 3 people stepped out, all in plain clothes but moving with the precision of federal agents. Sarah exhaled through her nose. Let's see if she still thinks she's in charge. Out on the dock, Bethany's confident posture faltered. The air felt charged again, like right before a storm breaks. And for the first time since this began, I realized the wind had shifted. The storm was ours now. The 2 SUVs came to a stop, in a synchronized line of black steel and chrome. The sound of tires grinding on gravel echoed off the lake, sharp and final. Dust hung in the sunlight like smoke after a gunshot. Bethany Whitfield stood frozen beside her car, clipboard still in hand, that polished HOA confidence draining from her face. The first agent stepped out, a tall man in a dark jacket, mirrored sunglasses reflecting the cabin and the lake beyond. Two more followed, moving with the easy precision of people who didn't need to raise their voices to control a scene. The air itself seemed to listen. Then the passenger door of the second SUV opened. Sarah stepped out. She wasn't wearing her badge yet, just jeans and that slate blue jacket she always favored when she was off duty, but ready for anything. The breeze caught her braid as she walked forward, each step deliberate. The quiet power of someone who knew the law was finally on her side. Bethany blinked, recovering her poise like a mask. "Excuse me, what is this?" she demanded. "You can't just drive onto private property." Sarah's voice carried clean across the yard. "You're right about one thing, Ms. Whitfield. This is private property. But it's my father's, not yours." Bethany's mouth twitched. "This land is under HOA jurisdiction. You're trespassing, and I'll have the sheriff—" A familiar engine hum cut her off. Sheriff McKay's patrol car rolled down the road and stopped behind the SUVs. He stepped out, hat tipped low, a folded stack of papers in his hand. "You can save that phone call, ma'am," he said evenly. "I'm already here." Bethany's gaze flicked from him to Sarah, then to the agents flanking her. The smug assurance she'd worn for weeks faltered. "What is this?" she asked again, quieter this time. Sarah walked closer until they stood a few feet apart. "This," she said, "is accountability." She opened her jacket just enough to reveal her bureau credentials, the gold glint of authority flashing in the sun. "You've been conducting illegal annexations, forging county documents, and extorting homeowners through fraudulent fines. You've crossed state lines doing it. That makes it federal." Bethany's jaw tightened. "That's ridiculous. Then you won't mind us looking," Sarah said. She nodded to the sheriff, who handed her the papers. "These are search warrants for your office, your residence, and all HOA records, signed by Judge Ramirez at 8 this morning." The moment the words landed, the world seemed to still. Even the lake went silent. Bethany took a step back, her heels sinking slightly into the damp gravel. "You can't—" "Oh, I can," Sarah said. Her tone was steady, low. "You see, Ms. Whitfield, you've spent years using fake bylaws to bully your neighbors. You thought no one would check the deeds. You thought paper was power. But the thing about paper, it leaves a trail." Behind her, Marcus raised his phone. The live feed from the motion cameras played on the screen, showing Bethany's face as she trespassed, as she pressed her hand against the window glass, as she took her own photographs of my fake plans. Every angle, every timestamp. "Recognize yourself?" Marcus asked. His voice was calm, almost kind. "You're on my father's property without permission. That's trespassing and unlawful surveillance. The cameras are linked to cloud storage, so even if you delete your phone, it won't matter." Bethany's face turned a mottled red. "You set me up!" Sarah didn't blink. "No, ma'am. You set yourself up. We just documented it." The sheriff stepped forward then, slow but sure. "Ms. Whitfield, I'm going to have to ask you to stay right where you are." Her hand trembled slightly, the clipboard rattling against her side. The agents moved in a half circle, forming a quiet perimeter. Nobody spoke. The only sound was the whisper of the wind coming off the water and the faint mechanical click as one of the agents unhooked a pair of handcuffs. Bethany swallowed hard. "You can't do this. I am the president of this homeowners association." Sarah took one final step forward. "Not anymore." She began reading the Miranda rights. each word measured and clear, carried across the lake like a verdict. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Bethany stood stiff, her polished image dissolving with each syllable. The agents turned her gently toward the SUV. The metallic click of the cuffs closing around her wrists was quiet but absolute. I watched from the porch, hands steady at my sides. I wasn't smiling, just breathing, deep and even, for the first time in weeks. As the sheriff and the agents led Bethany up the drive, the wind lifted across the lake, scattering the last bits of sawdust from the ruined dock. They swirled into the air, catching the sunlight, turning the destruction into something strangely beautiful. Sarah turned back toward me. Her eyes met mine, steady and tired, but alive. "It's done," she said simply. "Not yet," I replied. "Now we make sure it sticks." The agents loaded Bethany into the SUV, the door closing with a solid thud that echoed through the trees. Sheriff McKay followed in his cruiser, dust trailing behind them down the long road toward town. When the sound finally faded, I looked out at the lake again. The reflection of the clouds shimmered where the boathouse used to stand. For the first time, the water didn't look like loss. It looked like promise. Sarah stood beside me, her hand resting lightly on my shoulder. "She thought she owned the rules," she said softly. "And she forgot," I answered, "that some of us built them." The lake stayed quiet, but the silence no longer felt heavy. It felt earned. The next few days moved in slow motion, like the calm after thunder. The house smelled of coffee and printer ink again. My kitchen turned into a staging ground for the aftermath. Bethany Whitfield was behind bars pending arraignment, but Sarah said this was the part that really mattered: the paper trail, the cleanup, the reckoning. Every morning, Marcus drove into town to coordinate with the postal inspectors and the county clerk. Travis met with the district attorney's office to ensure the evidence was airtight. And Sarah, she lived on the phone, cross-checking deposit records and phone logs until her voice went hoarse. Me? I waited. Patience was something I'd learned working with water. Pressure builds slow, invisible, until the break comes all at once. 3 days after the arrest, we sat in the county courthouse, a modest brick building with a clock tower that hadn't worked in years. The hearing room was packed, neighbors from both sides of the lake, reporters with small cameras, even a few HOA board members who suddenly looked much smaller without their queen. Bethany was led in wearing gray, her hair pulled back tight, the last of her polish scrubbed away. She wouldn't look at me. Judge Ramirez took the bench, his voice steady as stone. "We're here on the matter of the state versus Bethany Whitfield, Gregory Purcell, and associated parties of Lakeshore Ridge Homeowners Association." The words hung in the air. The prosecutor began with the evidence. The forged annexation maps appeared first on the big screen, a clean line where none should have existed. Travis's diagrams showed the original boundary, clear as daylight, followed by the doctored version that swallowed my property whole. The judge leaned forward, his brow furrowing. Next came Marcus's recordings. The room filled with Greg Purcell's lazy chuckle as he said, "We make it uncomfortable. He'll fold." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Then Sarah took the stand. She laid out everything with the precision of a surgeon. Dates, emails, phone logs. She described how the HOA transferred community funds into Whitfield Contracting, owned by Bethany's brother, without invoices or oversight. And then came the twist that none of us saw coming. Halfway through the testimony, Greg Purcell himself stood up from the defense table. He leaned toward the microphone, his hands shaking. "Your Honor," he said, "I've agreed to cooperate. I can show you exactly how she did it." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Greg described the scheme in painful detail. The fake ballots signed by deceased residents, the manipulated surveys filed with the county recorder, the shredded complaints from anyone who questioned her. He even admitted that the demolition order for my boathouse wasn't an administrative error. It was punishment for refusing to pay. When he finished, the room was silent except for the sound of the judge's pen scratching across paper. Sarah looked at me from the witness stand, her face calm but her eyes bright. I gave a small nod. We had everything now. Bethany's lawyer tried to object, but the flood of documents, photos, and witness statements drowned out every argument. Each piece of evidence hit the table like another nail in the coffin of her empire. Finally, Judge Ramirez spoke. His voice was low, deliberate. Ms. Whitfield, you have abused authority entrusted to you by this community. You falsified legal documents, misappropriated funds, and violated the public trust. The law may move slowly, but it moves. Bethany stood stiff, her chin raised, though her hands trembled slightly. The gavel came down once, echoing through the chamber like a gunshot muffled by justice. Sentenced, 5 years for conspiracy, 3 for wire fraud, and restitution to every homeowner she'd extorted. She was also ordered to personally fund the full reconstruction of my boathouse, cedar for cedar, board for board. When the deputies led her out, she glanced over her shoulder, eyes full of something I couldn't name. Anger, maybe, or disbelief that her rules had finally stopped working. Outside the courthouse, the afternoon light was golden, soft on the courthouse bricks. Neighbors came up one by one. Bill, Cheryl, even a few I'd never met, offering handshakes, quiet words, and thanks. They'd all been victims in one way or another. The board's dissolved, Travis told me, stepping beside me. Judge appointed a receiver to audit everything. New elections will happen next year, if there's anything left to govern. Sarah came up last, holding a sealed envelope. From the clerk's office, she said. Inside was a new certified copy of the official plat map, stamped and signed, my name clearly marked outside any HOA boundary. The ink shimmered in the sun. I held it up and smiled, not out of triumph, but relief. The truth was finally written down again, right where it belonged. That night, back at the cabin, the wind was soft, carrying the scent of cedar and rain. The paperwork, the same kind that had once threatened to erase me, now sat stacked neatly on my desk, sealed with county stamps and signatures. I opened the window, listening to the quiet rhythm of the water against the rocks. Somewhere out there, across the dark, a loon called once and then was silent. For months, that lake had been a witness to theft and lies. Now it would hold something else. Peace, maybe, or at least the beginning of it. The morning after the verdict, the fog came back, drifting low over the water, the way it used to before everything went wrong. The air was cool enough to make my breath visible, curling away into the gray. I stood at the edge of the dock, coffee in hand, watching sunlight begin to push through the mist. The lake was calm again, like it had been waiting for this quiet as much as I had. A rumble came up the road, deep, friendly, familiar this time. I turned to see a flatbed lumber truck easing its way down the hill, followed by 3 pickup trucks loaded with tools and neighbors. Bill was the first out, waving one thick arm before slapping me on the shoulder. "Morning, Jake. Hope you're ready to work. That new cedar's not going to build itself." Behind him, Cheryl carried a thermos big enough to heat an army. "Coffee for the crew," she said with a smile. Sarah arrived soon after, her car crunching along the gravel drive. She'd traded her bureau jacket for an old flannel shirt of mine and a pair of gloves that were too big. Marcus and Travis followed in the same convoy, rolling up their sleeves before their engines had even cooled. For the first time in a long time, the sound of engines didn't make my stomach tighten. It made me smile. By mid-morning, the site was alive again. The air filled with the steady rhythm of hammers, the sharp ring of saws, and the smell of fresh-cut cedar. Every thud and scrape seemed to erase a little more of what had been done here. Bill whistled low, surveying the stacks of lumber. Judge said she's paying for all this, right? I nodded. Every board, every nail, straight from her personal account. He grinned. Guess justice comes with receipts. We laughed, and the sound carried over the water. Sarah moved beside me, her sleeves rolled up, sawdust in her braid. You know, she said, we could have let the county build it, contracted the job out. I know, I said, setting another beam into place. But then it wouldn't be ours. The hours passed like minutes. Even the weather cooperated. The clouds broke just enough to let sunlight pour across the lake, turning the surface into a sheet of gold. Every time a plank went down, it felt like laying a piece of history back where it belonged. In the afternoon, Sheriff McKay stopped by, hat in hand. Heard the noise from the ridge, he said. Had to make sure it was legal this time. His mouth twitched into a smile. Looks good, Jake. Real good. Appreciate it, Sheriff, I said. Thanks for standing by when it counted. He nodded once, the kind of nod men give when they've seen the worst of the world and are grateful for a glimpse of something better. We all learned something from this, he said before heading back up the road. By sunset, the skeleton of the new boathouse stood complete, strong, clean lines rising against the orange sky. The smell of fresh resin hung heavy in the air. I leaned against one of the posts, looking out at the reflection trembling on the water. Sarah joined me, wiping sweat from her brow. Think Mom would have liked it? She asked quietly. I looked at the curve of the roofline, the way it caught the fading light. She'd say we overbuilt it, I said with a soft laugh, and then she'd sit right there with her feet in the water. Sarah smiled, her eyes glassy. Marcus came up behind us holding a clipboard. Got something you might want to see, Dad, he said. He handed me a copy of a county notice, the ink still fresh. Ordinance 2025-4. All homeowners associations within Pine County will undergo mandatory independent financial audits every 2 years, with open public reporting of all funds and expenditures. I let out a long breath. So it's official. Yep, Travis said, joining us. Your fight didn't just fix your boundary, it changed the whole system. For a long while, none of us spoke. The sound of the lake filled the space between us. Gentle ripples, the soft tap of water against new wood. Later, when the others packed up and the sky turned deep violet, I stayed behind. The last rays of sunlight danced on the water like sparks fading from a fire. I pulled the old photograph from my pocket, the one I'd found in the rubble. It was creased now, worn at the corners, but the faces still looked out with that same easy pride. Sarah holding the hammer, me with my arm around her, both of us covered in sawdust and hope. I placed the picture inside a small glass frame and set it on a shelf by the boathouse door. A tiny tribute to what was lost and to what had returned. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of pine and rain across the water. The surface rippled once, then stilled. You can't vote against gravity, I murmured, half to the lake, half to myself. And you can't fake your way past the truth. The reflection of the new boathouse shone steady on the lake's surface, its wooden beams mirrored in perfect symmetry. For the first time in months, I felt the world balance again. As the stars came out, I turned off the lights and walked back toward the cabin. Behind me, the boathouse stood silent, strong and whole, just as it had been the day Sarah and I first built it. The lake, patient as ever, remembered everything. Sometimes the truth takes the long way home, but it always gets there. If you've ever stood your ground for what's right, drop a justice in the comments below. And if stories about courage, land, and quiet revenge speak to you, stick around, hit subscribe, and join me for the next one. Out here, every acre has a story worth telling.